Okay, so we all think we know why World War I started, right? An archduke gets assassinated and boom, the world goes to war. But what if I told you that's not the real story? Not even close. What if that single gunshot was just the tiny spark that lit a fuse that had been snaking its way across Europe for decades? Let's get into it.
Right, the Sarajevo incident. You know the one. June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand gets shot. And pretty much every history book you've ever read points right to that moment and says, there it is, that's the cause. But honestly, that's way too simple. It's a dangerously simple answer for something so unbelievably complex and devastating.
The reality is that assassination wasn't the cause. It was just the trigger. Think about it like this. The gun was already loaded, the safety was off, and it was pointed right at Europe's head. The real story isn't about the finger that pulled the trigger. It's about the massive, continent-sized powder keg that was just sitting there, waiting for any little spark. So yeah, let's just completely dismantle this myth of the one bullet. It wasn't the cause. It was just the final, almost inevitable spark that hit a system practically designed to explode. And to really get why, we need to look at all the ingredients that made the situation so incredibly volatile. I want you to picture Europe back then as this giant, overstuffed powder keg. It was just jam-packed with all this explosive material. You had decades of military buildups, this incredibly tangled web of alliances that were basically tripwires, and of course, the clashing ambitions of all these powerful empires. Europe wasn't peaceful, not at all. It was humming with tension, just waiting for one wrong move. Okay, so ingredient number one in this whole mess is something called the security dilemma. And it's a real doozy. It's this vicious cycle where one country does something to feel safer, build up its army, but that just makes its neighbors feel less safe. So what do? They build up their armies, and it just spirals. And you can see exactly how it worked right here. So Germany expands its army, right? They call it defense. But if you're France or Russia sharing a border with them, that doesn't feel very defensive. It feels threatening. So naturally, they build up their armies. Then you've got Britain, who reinforces its navy to protect its empire. Well, now Germany feels totally surrounded and circled, so it starts pouring money into its own navy to compete. See the pattern? Every single defensive move is seen as an aggressive one by somebody else. And here's the kicker. This wasn't something that just happened overnight. This cycle of paranoia and massive military spending had been building and building for more than 20 years. Honestly, you could argue Europe was in a kind of Cold War long before the first shots of the Great War were ever fired. All right, next ingredient, the alliance system. And we're not talking about friendly handshakes here. These were rigid, automatic military pacts. They basically turned the entire continent of Europe into one giant set of dominoes, just waiting for someone to flick the first one. It was a self-igniting network, ready to drag everyone into a war, no matter how small it started. So by 1914, everybody had picked a side. Europe was split right down the middle into two huge armed camps. You had the Triple Alliance, that's Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy, and then you had the Triple Entente, France, Russia, and Great Britain. The rules were simple. A fight with one of them meant you were picking a fight with all of their friends, too. And this, right here, is the most important part to understand. These alliances had automatic clauses. They were basically pre-programmed for war. It wasn't a maybe we'll help. It was a we must help. So if Austria-Hungary gets into a fight, Germany has to mobilize its army, period. If Russia moves to help its ally Serbia, then France is legally bound to join in. There was almost no room left for talking, for diplomacy. It was just a chain reaction. So just to recap, we've got a massive arms race and a tripwire alliance system. Now for the third key ingredient, the anxiety of the empires. We're talking about the old ones and the new ones. Specifically, you have the huge ambition of a newly powerful Germany, and then you have this pot of simmering tension in the Balkans that was just about to boil over.
Germany was the new superpower on the block, and boy, was it ambitious. The Kaiser wanted what he called Germany's place in the sun. So what does that mean? It means building a gigantic navy to challenge Great Britain. It means grabbing new colonies. It means dominating the continent. Now, if you're an established power like Britain or France, this doesn't look like ambition. It looks like aggression, and it just made them double down on their own military plans and tighten their alliances against Germany.
And where did all these imperial tensions finally collide? The Balkans. This region was an absolute mess of crumbling empires and fiery nationalism. You had Austria-Hungary desperately trying to hold its fragile empire together. You had Russia, who saw itself as the big brother and protector of all Slavic people, like the Serbs. And then you had Serbia itself, dreaming of creating a huge Slavic nation, a dream that was a direct threat to Austria-Hungary's existence. It was, without a doubt, the most dangerous place in all of Europe. So when that assassination finally happens in Sarajevo, just watch how fast the system takes over. The timeline is absolutely terrifying. 1 month later, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. 2 days after that, Russia starts mobilizing its entire army to protect Serbia. The very next day, Germany declares war on Russia. Then, Germany invades Belgium to get to France, which pulls Great Britain into the fight. In a little over a month, a local crisis explodes into a world war. The dominoes fell, one by one, exactly as the alliances were designed to make them fall.
Which brings us to the most tragic question of all, doesn't it? Everybody could see this catastrophe coming, so why didn't anyone stop it? Not a king, not a prime minister, nobody. And the simple, terrifying answer is, they couldn't. The machine they had all helped build was now in control.
I mean, think about this. First, their mobilization plans were all based on these super complex railway schedules. Once you start moving hundreds of thousands of soldiers, you literally can't just hit the brakes. Second, the generals were shouting louder than the politicians. Military logic completely drowned out any calls for caution or diplomacy. And maybe the most fatal mistake of all, every single side thought it would be a short, glorious war. They all thought their boys would be home by Christmas. So really, when you boil it all down, this quote says it best. This wasn't a war started by a single event. It was the war where the powder keg that Europe had spent decades building all by itself finally exploded.
So let's be absolutely clear. The true cause wasn't one man with one gun. It was a total, catastrophic system failure. It was the inevitable result of militarism, tangled alliances, and imperial greed. A system that, when you look back at it, seems like it was built for the single purpose of exploding.
And that's what leaves us with a pretty chilling question to think about. We've just looked at a system from 100 years ago that completely spiraled out of control. So you have to ask yourself, in our world today, with all of our own complex alliances, our own new military technologies, our own global tensions, is it possible that a similar runaway system is lurking right now, just waiting for its own trigger?